Ray was he was a lovely person, and he was so goddamn talented. I mean, my God, what he couldn't do. He could master 2 instruments. He could sing. He could dance. Yeah.
And nobody sounds like him on cornet or trumpet. Got this beautiful kind of pleading vibrato.
He had a really warm sound, and it was bigger when you heard him in person. You know, the sound came out. But are we on?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, Ray was a special favorite of mine. How could you not love him? You know, there was this little guy who, you know, he oozed talent, and he was so, you know, he was a sweetheart, and he was so delightful as an entertainer, you know, what he could do, and then he'd pick up that horn and blow you away with that big sound, and with vibrato. He had his own sound for sure. And his fiddle, no, violin, from a technical standpoint, he wasn't Jascha Heifetz, but he knew exactly what he could do, and some of the things that he did were very original. And again, as on the horn, he had a beautiful sound. And that's where he really enhances things, like Moon Mist is one of them. And in a small group setting, you know, that fiddle was wonderful. Ray was, in a sense, you know, he was short, and he was very, you know, he was a lovable guy, and he was a bad boy in many ways. You know, one of the things that he did, which was unfortunate, was that he got into heroin, which was, you know, which was endemic for a while, unfortunately, in jazz at a certain period. I mean, by no means everybody did that, but there was a lot of it. And it wasn't as prominent with swing and trad musicians as it was with, you know, with the beboppers. They're the ones who really brought it. First one known to me, and I was told by the older guy, the first jazz junkie was Jimmy Lunsford's high note man, Tommy Stevenson. May or may not be true. Anyway, Ray was someone who, you know, he also indulged a little in, you know, having a drink or something. I got to work with Ray once when I was involved with, I think I've mentioned him, this great TV director and jazz fan, Bob Kaiser, in Chicago when we did that series called Just Jazz. And we wanted Ray for one of them, so we got Ray, and he was great to work with, you know, no problem at all. He was delightful. Unfortunately, that is one of most of the shows have survived on Kinescope stuff, but that one is lost. Ray, of course, was Cootie Williams' replacement, and he did it in such a way that he could take Cootie's place in the arrangements that survived and the thing, and play Cootie's solos. He didn't play them note for note, he played them in his own way. Cootie, of course, had quit, went to Benny Goodman, where he was quite well featured. Incidentally, in the interview, again in that series of interviews, Cootie was interviewed, and he was back with Duke by then, and I think by the time he did the interview, he may have split again and gone out of his own. Whatever he said the time with Benny Goodman was the best time in his career in music. Some people would really choke at that. And the interviewer was Helen Dance, and she just passed over it. I mean, and she's talking about how when Cootie went with Goodman, how Ellington had said, you know, it's fine for you to go with Benny, but don't, you know, play in the section, don't take any solo. Naturally, Benny featured him. Superman was a 12-incher, you know, featuring the Eddie Sauter arrangement, and he plays beautifully on some of the things that have Sauter arrangements and Helen Forrest vocals, and you know, he's got some great songs. Not to mention the sextet. So, you know, he was happy there. Then he had his own band, his own big band, and then he went back to Ellington, and I think reluctantly, because he had been a leader for such a long time, you know. Cootie I never got to know well at all. I got to see him live, and I got to see him, you know, in different situations, and he had an enormous sound. He had a sound that was, you know, this wide and beautiful. And he got known for the plunger, but it was really his open horn to me. I mean, the plunger was great, but the open horn is a thing with a small group. Ba-boo, boo, ba-boo, da, 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 da. What is it called? Black Butterfly. Oh, gorgeous, gorgeous, gorgeous. So he was, you know, Cootie was a man of many sides on the horn. Beautiful in the interview he did, he talks about, this is still fairly early in his Ellington days. He said the band was playing at the Savoy Ballroom or the Cotton Club, and Louis was at the Lincoln Theater, which was the predecessor of the Apollo. And he said that he would talk Duke into timing the set in such a way that he could meet Louis after he got out of the Lincoln thing, and he would carry Louis' horn. They would walk to Louis' hotel together, and he would carry Louis' horn. So you can hear that in the fight. And Ray, too. I mean, they're both real offspring of Armstrong. Of course, Ray came into the band. Cootie left a big gap when he left, and there was nobody in the band. I mean, for a while, somebody, Rex Stewart, Cat wasn't there yet. Cat could have copied some of it. So Ray came in, and Ray, of course, took over many of Cootie's parts and did very well at that. And of course, he created that A-Train solo, you know. So when Cootie came back into the band and Ray was there, I'm afraid that Cootie was not very nice to Ray. Ray came to see me at Downbeat office in New York. This would have been, yeah, I guess, you know, I'd been in the late '60s, somewhere around the time, or maybe anyway, and he really didn't seem well, and he was saying, and he told me, I don't know whether this is on the record or not, you can decide that, but he told me that Cootie was being so mean to him. He said that he actually did some, you know, he hit him and he was just nasty to him. And, you know, Cootie was a big guy. So that was really, that really kind of shook me up. And I think for a while, Ray didn't exactly leave the band, but I think he stepped out for a while. You know, he took some time off. I think also the time that Duke went to England and he had to lay off the band and that stuff. Anyway, that was very sad. But it, you know, it evened out after a while. But I think, you know, Cootie resented the fact that Ray had replaced him so well. As I say, I didn't know Cootie, so I don't know what his personality was like, really. So certain things about the band on a personal level, some people found it hard to understand why Duke had Tony Watkins. Remember Tony Watkins? Tony Watkins was the singer with the band in the later years. And actually Tony came out of a gospel background, and that's, you know, that's what he sounded like. But in terms of why Tony was there, well, he wouldn't have been there if he hadn't been plausible, passable singer, you know, who even in some cases managed to get a big hand when he, you know, moved around. But behind all that, he was invaluable behind the scenes as a kind of den mother for the band. Not only was he a good peacekeeper when things would happen like what I just described with Cootie and Ray. We very rarely did it get physical, but there were arguments, and there were things like I mentioned about Cat Anderson and so on. So he was a peacekeeper, but not only that, he also was able to sew on buttons, you know, when buttons came loose and so on. So he was a real den mother. And he was a nice guy, you know, he's a big guy, but you know. So that, you know, that was, these are behind the scenes kind of things that serve to keep the peace and keep the band together. It's remarkable how Ellington managed to do that. I don't think anybody else, I mean, any other band leader would probably have, you know, he would have fired people, he would have done this. Ellington, the main thing was the music. So as long as somebody was a voice that he wanted in the band, I mean, they couldn't have gone out and murdered somebody, but he was willing to deal with difficulty. However, sometimes he could do it in a somewhat cruel manner. I remember one time at Newport when the band was there appearing several days in a row. They had, George would do that when he could get Duke, you know, get him to stay for a while. So the night before, Paul had been carousing, and he missed an important rehearsal where they were going through something or whatever. So here comes the band. They're on in the afternoon, and it's a fairly hot day in July. And so Duke says, "And now Paul Gonsalves." You know, Paul steps out, and he does a number. Or there was Happy Reunion or something. And then he goes to his chair and sits down. There comes the next, and now Paul Gonsalves. Paul gets up, and Duke calls another number. This time it's a fast one. And Paul slinks back to his chair and sits down. And would you believe the third, and now Paul Gonsalves. 3 times he did that. And the third one was Body and Soul, which was a long feature in 2 tempos for Paul. That was a lesson, you know, don't do this again. I'm sure he said nothing to him. That was what he did, you know. It was a musical lesson. So that was the way Duke was able to deal with these things. But when they got back, when it was a question of one time in Vegas, Ray and Paul got busted, and you know, and Mercer had to get them out of. It was Mercer who got them out of jail and got them back to the band and stuff. So. Yeah, it was somebody called, what was the peculiar institution? The Ellington band was a peculiar institution. But Duke was able to hold it together. You know, he did things that, Johnny Hodges counting money. Ellington did not get rich on the band because, first of all, he paid his musicians very generously, and Johnny was the highest paid in the band. He also kept them on payroll when there were holes in the engagements. But what he would do most of the time, if it was possible, he would take the band in the studio and he would record new things that he wanted to hear, and it was kind of like a laboratory. And many of these things came out later on, and they're very good. And that's how he managed to you know, make up for the fact that he kept the band on payroll when they were not working, you know. So I think I'm not privy to everything that happened after Duke passed away, but there certainly wasn't anything, you know, like millions of dollars there which you could anticipate from all the royalties. The royalties from his successful songs is really what enabled him to keep the band together all that time. If it hadn't been for that, like other bands, economy would probably have forced something, at least temporary layoffs, but he managed to keep the band for that uniquely long time. It was a remarkable achievement. But it cost him, you know, I mean, it cost his heirs. Not that they were left in poverty. He took very good care of Ruth. No.
Hold that thought.